Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's got a little subtle green.
Please. Now you can have as many as you want. I'm done, actually. Take the good stuff. It's all yours.
Yo!
I gotta be able to learn how to do that. That's pretty cool. All right. So we're back for round two. You guys look refreshed, and that makes me a little nervous. But we're not getting paid, so.
Don't be fooled.
All right. If you want to go ahead and get started, I imagine first expert is traffic. Is that right?
First expert is actually the
Environmental. Okay.
At this point, we ask Jake McLean. Come forward.
Raise your right hand. State your name.
It's Jacob McLean.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Jake, where do you live?
I live on 88 Cranford Road in the Melbourne Hills neighborhood, approximately a tenth of a mile from the property,
And how long have you lived there?
since 2013, and in West Asheville since 2005.
And do you or anyone in your household use the city's Hominy Creek Greenway?
Yeah, in the same ways previously discussed. Our whole family uses the Greenway for recreation, all of the previous uses.
Swimming, bicycling, walking, all that kind of stuff?
Yep, playing in the creek.
Okay. Do you use any of the roads or intersections that have been studied in the TIA for this project?
All of them.
Okay. And have you, what do you do for a living, Jake?
I'm a water resources engineer.
And do you have any degrees that qualify you to work in that area?
Yeah, I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in civil engineering, and I'm a professional engineer in the state of North Carolina and a certified floodplain manager.
And do you have any other licensures or credentials that certify you to work in the areas of hydraulic, or excuse me, let me back up. Your master's degree, is there a specialization attached to that?
Yeah, my specialization was in hydrology and hydraulics, and I did research on bridge hydraulics and two-dimensional modeling and bridge scour.
And what can you explain for the board what that means? What does hydraulics and hydraulic modeling mean?
Studying what happens in the creek and on the landscape when it floods by looking at anything from hand calculations to modeling.
Do you have any experience with flood modeling?
Yes, sir.
How many different flood models do you think you've done?
Probably between 50 and 100. I do several per year. I've been in this field for 18 years. I work on stream restoration projects where the majority of our projects have flood modeling requirements because we're working in regulatory floodways.
And what experience do you have with stormwater analysis and treatment?
Substantial amount of experience as in a design capacity, designing stormwater management devices in a planning and like watershed study capacity.
And where do you currently work?
I work at a water resources engineering firm.
And have you completed projects within the French Broad River Basin before?
Yes, dozens.
And are we at Exhibit J?
Yes, sir.
I'm handing you what's been marked as Exhibit J. Can you identify what that is?
This is my resume.
Any objection?
Tab 6.
You can give us a second to open up to that. Any objection to that being admitted from the board? All right, it is so admitted.
At this point, we would ask that Mr. McLean be certified certified as an expert in the areas of civil engineering with particular emphasis in hydraulics, hydrology, stormwater management, and floodplain management.
If I may, I have just a couple questions briefly. Who's your employer?
I'm working as myself for this project. I can answer the question. Wildlands Engineering.
You said Wildlands Engineering?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to call them. I'm curious where you work. I think it's going to help your attorney's point. Any questions for him?
You asked the question I was going to. We have no objection.
If you could speak in the mic. All right.
You asked the question I was going to, and we have no objection to Mr. McLean being recognized as an expert.
Just so I have that clear, expert in stream restoration, flood modeling, which one are you?
In the areas of hydraulics, hydrology, stormwater management, and floodplain management.
I've also worked on several projects of a more general civil engineering nature, site development plans, bridges, just.
And civil
yeah,
engineering was how I prefaced all of
At first
that.
you said civil engineering, and I think that's appropriate.
Okay, so admitted.
Mr. McLean, have you reviewed the application for the CUP before the board?
Yes.
And what about the site plans?
Yes.
Have you performed any analyses regarding the proposed development and its impact on Hominy Creek, flooding, stormwater, water quality, and adjoining upstream and downstream properties from the development?
I've looked at all of those.
Okay. Have you performed an analysis on them or a report?
Yes, I prepared a report based on numerous analyses.
And based on that analysis, have you been able to form an opinion based on your professional experience on whether the proposed use will adversely affect the health or safety of persons residing or working in the neighborhood?
Yes.
And have you been able to form an opinion based on your professional experience on whether the proposed use will be injurious to property or public improvements in the neighborhood?
Yes, I have.
Okay. At this point, I'm handing you what has been marked as Exhibit K. You identify K.
This is my report.
And is that your signature on the front page here?
Yes,
And the date is 12/9/2019?
that's correct.
Okay. This is tab 6 as well, note from the board.
If there's no objection from either side, I do want to give ourselves adequate time to read it. I'll take it under advisement for now and admit it at the appropriate time if we reach that point. But I would like to give it its due weight and read and understand a little bit better.
So, Mr. McLean, the report you prepared, how did you form your opinion? For the benefit of the board, can you indicate the process you went through?
Yes, I looked at a lot of background data in addition to the proposed site plans. So data like the soils on the site from the U.S. Soil Survey, or from the Soil Survey. I looked at watershed drainage areas of both Hominy Creek and tributary, what proportion was going to the wetland versus the tributary that runs through the site. I looked at all of the FEMA data. That includes Buncombe County's flood insurance study, a hydraulic model that's available through FEMA, and various data that's in those reports. I looked at, I just discussed the water quality data that's available for the site with Hartwell, the one that's involved in the app that's used for swimming. Some other things, but that's the brunt of it.
Did you do any modeling for this project to form your opinion?
Yeah, so I obtained the hydraulic model from FEMA and used that to analyze what was going on specifically at Bear Creek Road. Water goes over the road when it's flooding on a 50-year frequency or 100-year frequency. And so I was looking at when that water goes over the road, where is it going? I also did stormwater analyses where I looked at the site plan and what both the site plan and also the watershed hydrology of the tributary to look at how many acres was draining onto the property from off-site and what was happening when it came onto the property and what effect that would have on water quality treatment.
If we could put up my presentation, please, Josh. So I think the board's pretty oriented at this point, but can you identify where on this map Hominy Creek is?
Yeah, so how do you want me to do that?
Maybe just grab the mic and do a Frank Sinatra kind of.
Yeah. So Hominy Creek is on the comes onto the property in the lower left side of this that's Bear Creek Road that you see that it crosses under near those call outs. And that is the church and the church parking lot with that grade area, I think maybe demoed entrance. I can't read it's the existing entrance. So Hominy Creek runs along the left or north side of the property and then arcs all the way around. This kind of follows the high side of the page and then the right-hand side of the page, and it borders the property on two sides.
And in the middle of that slide there, are there any tributaries that feed into Hominy Creek there?
Yeah, it's where the stream buffer call out an existing stream. That's a tributary that follows the historic valley of Hominy Creek. So Hominy Creek used to flow down to the bottom of the page and around and follow that path back to where it flows now. I think we have probably graphics of that. So.
And what purpose does that tributary serve for the surrounding properties?
That tributary conveys water off of the upstream properties.
Yeah. Do you know approximately how many acres of property we're talking about that use that tributary that it serves?
Yeah, at its confluence with Hominy Creek, it drains 100 acres.
Okay. And what impact does that have, and what, I guess, between impervious and pervious for that drainage area, what are we looking at for the properties that feed into that tributary?
Yeah, so that drainage area is about 10% impervious, meaning that, I-240, the road, residential structures, those are all draining water off the landscape onto the property, and it's either going into the creek or it's going into the wetland, and that's a 3-acre wetland. It receives about 25% of that, so 25 acres of runoff go into that wetland and receive water quality treatment before entering the creek.
And if you could, I've switched slides here. Can you identify what's in this slide? When you say wetlands, what are you talking about?
Yeah, that hatched area at the bottom is the 3-acre wetland. And it's been divided into the portion that would be filled versus the portion that would remain. And you can also see of the portion that will remain, some of that is slated to be taken by the DOT for the interstate widening.
And what purpose do wetlands serve in this context?
They reduce runoff and also provide water quality treatment for water coming off the landscape. And
the water quality treatment, talk to the board specifically about what you mean. What is that? What happens?
Because it both provides water storage, so as the water sits there, it infiltrates into the ground, and that's one mechanism of treatment. It also, the plants that exist in the wetland uptake nutrients and other pollutants and treat those through those biological processes. There's other biological processes that go on. So those are some of the ways that it treats that.
And that treatment, what does that keep from ending up in the water?
Various pollutants, nutrients. If there's sediment in the water, usually that would fall out of suspension and be deposited instead of going downstream. Bacteria.
And in the proposed development, how much of this wetlands is removed as part of the proposed development?
So 1.8 acres is what I didn't explain that I took the site plans and brought those into AutoCAD and scaled them to other existing features so that I could do analysis on those drawings. And so the plans say more than 1 acre, but it's actually 1.8 acres is the area that they've delineated to remove.
And with the reduction of these wetlands, what impact does that have on water quality eventually for Hominy Creek?
That would have a negative impact on water quality. That 25 acres would no longer receive the level of treatment that it's currently providing, and it would be significantly diminished, the level of treatment.
And that means the nutrients you were mentioning, and other things like
Yeah.
that end up in the water.
Right, and heavy metals and things from cars on the highway.
And currently, they are being treated through that wetland.
That's right.
Okay. And your soil, did you look at the soil? You said you looked at the soils on this property. What did you find when you looked at those soils?
The take-home thing that I found from them, that they have a high capacity for infiltration, so they're providing a lot of benefit right now versus a soil that would not have that natural capability to infiltrate a lot of water. So that infiltration has a lot to do with the level of treatment that the site currently is able to provide. Obviously, when it's a parking lot there, instead of the current condition woods and grass, and the soils would no longer play a role except to the extent that they, where the water ends up getting put at the bottom of the pipe, would those.
So let's maybe summarize to make it a little bit clearer,
Yeah.
maybe for the board on this. What you're saying is that the soils are fairly porous in a way that allows water to infiltrate into them right now in their current condition.
That's correct.
And that your analysis of the project is that by filling in the areas that will be filled in on the floodplain, that impervious quality that allows for treatment goes away.
Yes, all the areas that become impervious lose that capacity, or the areas that are filled also would.
And I'm looking, if you look, this is page 24 in our presentation. Can you tell the board what this represents, this diagram that's in your report?
Yeah, so this represents the area that drains water to the creek. It's the yellow linear feature is I-240, and the larger yellow blob is the watershed So those are at the periphery, the high points where any water that falls within that boundary would flow towards the creek and the wetland. On the north side of I-240, all of that drains to the wetland prior to draining to the creek.
Okay. And can you tell us what we're looking at here?
This is the flood insurance. It's the floodplain mapping with an overlay. So the floodplain mapping shows the floodway and the floodplain and the 500-year floodplain in yellow. I'll spare you guys the details since you've heard them before. It also shows flood-prone structures, and though the legend shows the statistical probability of those structures flooding over the lifetime of a 30-year mortgage. So the orange properties, the properties that are orange and light orange, if you're in the 100-year floodplain, you have a 30% chance of getting flooded over the course of a 30-year mortgage.
And Miss Warren's property, I think the board's oriented pretty well on where that's located, but that's at the top of this map, within the floodplain and along the floodway there, correct?
That's right.
And the city's greenway is on the right side of this, east of the proposed development on the other side of the
Yeah, upper right.
And let's talk a little bit about what the difference between, we've heard about the floodway and we've heard about the floodplain. So what's the purpose, what purpose does the floodway serve?
Yeah, the floodway is predominantly a management tool for floodplain managers, and it lets them allow for development within the floodplain, but provides kind of a limit to how much that development can affect floodwaters. So that surcharge value is the limit, and that's set at 1.0. So if you fill in the entire floodplain, that's in all cases that would not cause a rise of greater than 1 foot on the adjacent structures, where you're looking at that specific kind of analysis. It's a modeling analysis that ends up yielding this mapping data that they can use to manage floodplains.
And what is so that's a floodway. What does the floodplain do? What's the purpose of the floodplain?
Yeah, so the floodplain includes the floodway. Floodplains both convey and store water during flood events. Depending where you are on the floodplain, it may be doing more of one or the other, but that reduces downstream flooding because those waters that are stored on the landscape are not going downstream where they would otherwise go if they weren't being stored on the landscape. So depending on the depth of flooding above the floodplain, like if you've got 10 foot deep of water, the area that 10 foot deep of water is ponding over is the volume that's being stored there instead of moving downstream onto adjacent and downstream properties.
So I think it's important, when you say storage, I want to be clear, the storage, what you're saying is that storage that's holding water in a flood event that otherwise would be passing down the floodway downstream. It's essentially containing it for a period of time versus it being sent downstream during the flood event.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. And are there any other examples of large floodplains in the area that might be helpful for the board in thinking about how those function to hold stormwater?
Yeah, so when you're looking at that function of the floodplain, flood storage, the natural question is, well, what exact benefit is that providing downstream? And so in the Swannanoa Basin, when there was flooding in 2004, after that there was a lot of evaluation of projects that could help decrease flooding in Biltmore Village. And one of the projects that was identified was flood storage at the soccer complex in East Asheville. So that's an example of an area on the area with a wider floodplain where when it floods, that water spreads out and fills up on that floodplain, and that has been studied in detail to show that it reduces flood elevations in Biltmore Village and also flood damage.
And that's because it holds that water back.
That's right.
To the storage capacity. In your hydraulic analysis that you've done, I'm going to show you. Can you tell us what this is?
That's a Google Earth oblique image of the project site.
And what are the blue lines depicting in there?
The arrow that says flow under bridge also includes flow over the road. That's Hominy Creek, the main channel. And the other blue line that has the arrow overtopping flows, that's where water goes under a 50 or 100-year flood event when it's overtopping Bear Creek Road and flows over the road through the old river valley. So where it says flow under bridge, that area was cut through in the last 150 years as part of dam building, and the river used to flow around that high point, and the high point used to extend across where the river currently goes.
And where that split off for the historic river valley, all of that area there, that's on the proposed development site, correct?
Yes, it's on the site, and it's all within the 100-year floodplain. Well, the majority of it is.
So currently, in a 100-year and a 50-year flood event, that area where the historic river valley is, that's within the floodplain on the proposed development site, that's serving as flood storage area right now.
That's correct.
Okay. And in this, I think this is another good example of it. Can you tell us what we're seeing in this schematic?
Yeah, this is delineated from a map of the old lake that used to exist here when there was a dam downstream, and the bridge flow again is the location of the existing Hominy Creek main channel, and then the historic river valley follows the arrows around kind of the loop there. And during the course of going in its historic route, which the floodwaters follow that same route, it crosses over the entrance road shown in red, the loop road. It crosses over it multiple times, and it also ends up being constricted by the loop road because all of the roads and where in the low part of this figure where you see the red parking lot and buildings delineated, those are all built up above the level of the 100-year flood elevation, so water cannot go over there, so it's no longer able to follow that path, and it's constricted, which allows less water to pass through that area than is currently able to pass through there.
So what you'd be describing, and just so we're clear, the red areas on the bottom of that graphic, right under where it says historic river valley, those are that's the parking lots, roads, and buildings within the proposed development, correct?
That's correct.
And by building in the floodplain, they're having to raise the grade of the land, correct?
Yes.
Above the 500-year flood.
100-year.
Or 100-year, excuse me, 100-year floodplain. What does that do to flood storage within that area?
So all of the flood storage in that area is lost, and I delineated. I looked at their proposed topographic information, and used that to determine that under current conditions, this site stores 90 acre-feet or 87 acre-feet of water. So that's a volume approximately equal to about 30 million gallons of water. And their roads and parking lots and other fill within the floodplain will displace approximately a third of that current storage.
So that storage is gone.
That's right.
Now,
So that 10 million gallons that's no longer stored there is gone downstream.
Okay. This is another graphic. Tell us what we're seeing here.
This is it's a graphic more than anything of the flow path that water is currently able to travel as it overtops Bear Creek Road on the left-hand side. And you can kind of see where it's overtopping there, the greens and yellows, and then it's flowing in the path of the historic river valley. It also flows over the parking lot, and then it exits back out of the old historic river valley back into the main channel. And I didn't point out on the figure with all the red delineated parking lots and things, but the road also crosses that location, so that's basically kind of like putting a plug in the bathtub, so water can't get out of there except through the 20 to 30 foot culvert that they're propose to put there for the tributary.
Let's look at that again.
Okay.
So when you just said a couple of things. Let's summarize first. What you're saying is this is on slide 29 of our presentation. This is what's showing an existing flow path for the river in a 50-year or 100-year event, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, both the 50 and the 100-year event follow the path shown.
And what you were saying is with the roads, and the roads are in red at the bottom right above the historic river valley, correct?
Yeah, where it says outlet, that is a road and an associated embankment that's built up above the level or up to or above the level of the 100-year flood. And because the tributaries there's a proposed culvert that will allow water from the tributary to exit. But that culvert, as currently designed, is only 20 to 30 feet wide. So so that restricts flow that's coming over the road and filling up the old river valley, and it's trying to get out, but it can't get out as fast as it's coming in.
So as it comes in, and you've got the one culvert at the end that restricts its ability to leave the area, correct?
That's right. It's restricted at numerous points, but that's the last.
And what will happen to the land that's in between, let's say within the road bounds there? That's where the church, let's talk about the church. What happens when the water can't exit at that point? What happens to the church and the property within that area?
Yeah, so that water, like I said, the water can't exit as fast as it's coming in, and so the water level starts to rise in that historic valley, and that will cause an increase in flooding on the church.
And that's an increase based on the proposed development that will cause that, not compared to existing.
That's correct. It's an increase over existing conditions as a result of the proposed development.
And when we say an increase, are we talking inches? Are we talking, what are we talking about here?
Several feet for both the 50 and 100-year flood events that, depending on the exact location, varies. It also shows, so I don't think we talked about the fact that I prepared a hydraulic model to look at when this water overtops the road. Do you want me to?
And I'm getting to,
Okay.
so we'll move forward with this.
Yeah.
Just to summarize, in this, and this is slide 30, does this depict where the flow will have to go after the proposed development because of the fill?
Yeah, you can see that it no longer is able to flow in the area labeled as filled with road, parking, and buildings.
And so it just shifts that.
That's correct.
And what does this represent here?
This
Slide
is a
31.
topographic map of the site. It's like a kind of a topographic rendering that's both color shaded and also, I guess, kind of hill shaded.
And
So it shows the same thing. Say it's the same map that we have been looking at. The green and yellow areas are low ground. This is an existing conditions topographic map.
And that's slide 31. On slide 32, what do we see?
This is a proposed conditions topographic map prepared based off of digitizing the proposed plans.
And the orange area at the bottom of that, what is that showing?
That's a parking lot, the loop road, and it's fill in the historic river valley in the floodplain.
So you're talking about the analysis, the hydro analysis you did to look at the flooding levels on the church and upstream and downstream properties. What is this in slide 33 that's in your report?
This is a cross section from the hydraulic model that I prepared. It shows in light gray the existing topography or the existing ground, and then in black the proposed ground. So this is at the entrance to the development, and what you're kind of looking at with the black is the fill that's being placed to build the entrance road into the development. So on the right-hand side, that's Bear Creek Road. It looks a little funky there at the top, but that was just not corrected because it didn't have any impact on anything. But so you come off of Bear Creek Road down that pitch. The light blue is the current flooding for, this looks like you've taken the 50-year case.
Jake, just because I'm this tall, this is the line you're talking about. I want to make sure the board members understand.
That's right. And then the darker blue that's up at the church doorstep is, that's the proposed conditions.
So this is the existing flood level in a 50-year storm for this area and the church and Bear Creek Road, the lower line, the light blue. And the upper dark blue line is what happens after the proposed development. Correct?
That's correct.
What does this show us?
This is the same model, but showing the existing and proposed water surface elevations for the 100-year flood.
And in the 100-year flood, again, this lower line is the
Yes.
And the upper dark blue line that runs through the dark box there, that represents the church, correct?
Yes.
And so that dark blue line shows the level of the floodwaters in a 100-year event for the church.
That's right.
Okay. And so we're talking about a magnitude of feet of increased flooding for the church property as a result of the project's design.
Yeah, the impact that I modeled extends upstream to the road, so it would impact the road. And by extending up that far, it's also impacting what's going on at the bridge, which is impacting the properties upstream and downstream of the bridge by increasing how much, increasing the water surface level above the bridge, and the corresponding velocity increases.
So when you have a loss of, you said, roughly a third of the 27 million gallons of storage presently in place, what happened? You said there's 10 million gallons now go downstream.
Right.
Okay. What impact does that have on property owners downstream from the development as a result of that?
That would have a negative impact. It would increase the flow rates and increase the velocities and erosion rates on their property.
Does it increase flood levels for certain properties close to the bridge?
Yeah, it would. It would increase flood levels for any adjacent and downstream properties because everyone downstream is being affected by that. But in particular, closer to the project, the impact is amplified. I mean, as you go downstream, it's.
I'm going to go back for a second just so we can pick those out. When you say properties that are going to have an increased level of flooding as a result of the development, I want us to be very specific about what you're talking about. We're now on slide 25 of the presentation, Hominy Creek floodplain structures. Here we go. So in this situation, the properties you're referring to, and I'm looking at the floodplain structures map. I wish this little thing would work. Are you referring to the properties that are along Bear Creek Road at the corner of Sand Hill and Bear Creek Road that are in the orange on that map?
Yes.
Okay. And would the increased flood levels also extend upstream?
Yes, more as much as anything as a result of the hydraulics versus the flood storage. There's two things impacting flooding, but
tell
yes.
us about that. How would the loss of the storage cause flooding upstream? Explain that for the board.
So the loss of storage is actually what would result more in like adjacent and downstream impacts because there's a greater amount of water flowing downstream. The change in hydraulics and the constricting of the flow so that it's caused to back up and raise as you go upstream is the thing that would cause upstream flooding.
And that's the culvert as part of the road that's blocking the exit of that water, correct?
Yeah, that's all the constrictions and fill that block the flow of water through that old river valley.
And that's slide 28. That's what's labeled as the outlet, correct? And so that backs up water that causes upstream flooding because it can't escape through the culvert, correct?
That's right.
Okay. What about, would Miss Warren's property in particular result in higher levels of flooding based on your analysis?
She would certainly feel the impacts of the storage loss. So increased flows and velocities and erosion rates based off of that factor. And I'm not certain as to whether she would or would not be impacted by the changes to the flood hydraulics.
But let's talk about the velocities. When you say increased velocities, what does that mean?
That means that the water's flowing faster against her property, the stream bank. It's greater potential for it to start eroding. I think you saw some of the photos of the creek, and it's highly erodible soils, so more potential for erosion as a result of that.
So the higher velocity that you predict her property will experience will result in higher levels of erosion, correct? Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Okay. And have you had experience with erosion remediation or stream bank remediation?
Yes, I work on stream restoration projects professionally.
And what are the kind of costs that are associated with remediating erosion that might be caused by this kind of increased erosion?
We typically tell folks like $100 to $200 a linear foot, and there's kind of a threshold cost for like individual landowners. It's really cost prohibitive because there's an economy of scale, as with a lot of things. So you still have to do all the permitting and the mobilization and all the other kind of costs that go along with a design and construction project.
So there could be potentially thousands of dollars in costs for Miss Warren as a result of the increased erosion.
Absolutely.
What about did you look at the city's property?
Very familiar with the city's property. I guess, can you clarify?
Yeah, I'll ask a follow-up. Is the city's property going to experience the same erosion problems and velocity problems that you just described for Miss Warren?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to circle back to stormwater. Did you review the proposed stormwater that's being included in this project?
Yes, in detail.
Okay, and what did your review include?
I looked at their proposed topography and did rough delineations of which areas on the project were draining to which ponds. So I looked at where water was going on the landscape and where it was going to ponds or where it was going to underground detention. I looked at the effectiveness of the stormwater management practices that are proposed. And
when you saw the proposed treatment, what kind of treatment are they proposing at this point?
they're proposing underground detention in wet ponds primarily, and that's the only thing that's designated on the plans to my knowledge.
And what do you know, based on your review of the wet ponds, what's your opinion about the sufficiency of that from a water quality standpoint? And again, I'm not asking you about permitting. I'm not asking you about whether they get their stormwater permit. None of that is applicable to this board. I'm asking you about what impact that will have on water quality.
Right. The state just published new stormwater guidelines, design guidelines in the last 2 years. Those guidelines describe the efficiency of various stormwater management practices. So you've heard things like rain gardens, you got things like green roofs, swales. So wet ponds are among the least effective at treating pollutants. They were also footnoted in that design document as really underperforming with regards to the standard, but being left in there because they are the predominant way that people are able to meet their stormwater requirements. So they basically acknowledge that they're substandard in treating pollutants.
If I can read from your report, this is section 2.2. Under the graph that says A-3, you've highlighted the wet ponds in red, and then the DEQ manual states, and I'm quoting, the research data on wet ponds and stormwater wetlands actually indicate that only about 50% of those studied met the performance standards shown. Meaning the other half don't meet the performance standard for the treatment to which they're supposed to provide. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
Okay. And I'm following on. DEQ is retaining these as primary stormwater control measures due to their history as being considered standalone SCMs and their capacity to manage peak flows. would it be a fair characterization of that statement to say we're essentially just keeping them in here because we've used them for so long historically?
That's correct. And what you're reading is not my words. That's a verbatim from the Stormwater Manual,
That the Department of Environmental Quality for the state of North Carolina puts out.
their design manual. Yeah.
Okay. So with the treatment they're using, what impact do you think that's going to have on water quality?
So I coordinated with a colleague who prepared an appendix to the report and looked at pollutant loading rates for existing versus proposed conditions. And he concluded, and I reviewed and agreed with his conclusion that pollutant loading, or basically how much pollutant is leaving the property. Sorry, let me rephrase that. So there's an increase over existing conditions in downstream pollutant loading, and those pollutants are flowing downstream through the creek during storm events.
And this is this is the third to the last page in your report. And I'm reading here, correct me if I'm wrong, it says total nitrogen, the addition of 333 pounds a year, or a 258% increase over current conditions. Does that sound correct? And for total phosphorus, 35-pound year increase, which is a 202% increase over current conditions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then total suspended solids, that's 2,325 pounds per year, or a 43% increase over current conditions, correct? And then lastly, fecal coliform. And I'll say I am not smart enough to actually say what that number is.
Forming unit.
Yes, to the
units.
10th degree, or a 238% increase over current conditions. And this is, to be clear, these are additional pollutants that will enter the waterway as a result of the development as it's proposed.
Yes, these are model loading rates based off of land use. So the proposed land use generates a lot more pollutants than the existing land use, and is only partially treated by the wet ponds, as we've discussed.
And that's even with the stormwater treatment they're proposing, this still is the increase.
That's right.
What happens to water when these enter the water system? What effects do these pollutants have on public health for those who use the waterway?
They have a negative impact on use of the water and public health, and the EPA sets standards for letting people have full body water contact with water. So when the water quality is poor, that is a threat to human health.
So I know you've been talking for a while, and I want to come back to kind of summarize everything that we've heard for the board's benefit. So to summarize your opinions, the proposed development as it's configured will result in higher flood levels. And I'm going to go back, if I could have the presentation one more time.
Max, do you mind put the presentation back up? Thanks.
Your testimony is that the proposed development in its current configuration will increase flooding for the church and the area in the surrounding area by several feet or more, correct?
Yes.
For the homes at the top along Bear Creek Road that are in orange, you predict increased flood levels for these properties, correct?
That's correct.
Your opinion is that by losing, the effects of the development will increase the velocity of water flowing down the floodway, correct?
Yes, in both both in the river channel and on the floodplain.
Which increases erosion along properties along and adjoining the proposed development, including Miss Warren's and the city's property.
That's correct.
And that erosion would result in the need for remediation that could cost, at least in Miss Warren's case, thousands of dollars, I would imagine, correct? And for the city, magnitudes over that?
Yes, they have a lot more frontage on the creek.
Then your opinion is also that with the stormwater that's coming off of this due to the loss of the wetlands and the treatment that's associated with that, that it's going to increase pollutants entering the waterway, correct?
That's right. One of the focal points of the appendix to my report that looks at those specific water quality, I guess, the decrease in water quality. A portion of that is due to the loss of the treatment currently provided by that 1.8 acres of wetland. So it's treating the church parking lot. There's a swale that's also treating the church parking lot that gets maintained as a tall grass swale and provides treatment. So those features are being severely disrupted or going away completely.
And as a result of those increased pollutants, it results in a decrease in water quality.
That's correct.
And your opinion is that that poses a threat to health for those who use the creek for recreation purposes.
That's correct.
Okay. And just to again clarify, it is also your opinion that the increased flooding and velocity and erosion constitute, and I want to get this right, for those properties that will suffer the increased flood levels and the higher velocities due to erosion, that's going to be injurious to those properties specifically.
Yes.
And that's directly attributable to the proposed development.
Yes.
I can just a very quick one. I'll ask you just a couple more questions, and then I'll be done. This is, and again, I want to be clear. This has nothing to do with the permits. Your analysis is independent of those permits. It is not dependent on them or changes because of them. Correct?
That's right. I was looking at a separate analysis of the water that overtops the road and goes through that old river valley and how that affects that whole old river valley and the church, and then how that ultimately affects the upstream road.
Okay.
Hydro. Yeah.
I don't have any further questions for Mr. McLean.
Thank you. Right.
At this point, Mr. Chair, were you going to say? I don't want to interrupt.
No, I want to hear what you're going to say next.
Hartwell Carson is our next expert that we plan on calling.
And he's traffic.
French Broad Riverkeeper.
Okay.
This is again to be related to water quality.
Just as a logistical matter, we determined that we should say this in open session. George raised a fair concern about how long we have people here. I did want to check in with our board staff and the people who keep the lights on this building, because I don't care to do this hearing in the dark, what our time limit looks like, and then what is feasible for the board members here, because surprisingly we're not getting paid for this. But I do want to check in with the folks here to see if this is something that we can continue doing without prejudicing someone, because I don't imagine either one of you guys want to push up against the idea of someone rushing through a hearing just so they can get back to work.
My only request is that if we are going to end the hearing early, if we could get to, my two traffic experts are from Raleigh and drove up today, and so we would like, if I could get that testimony through, that if the board was going to even continue it, that would be done so they wouldn't necessarily have to return. That would be very, very helpful for us. But we're happy to stay as long as it's necessary to get done with this, but whatever the board would like.
While staff talks about that, I think the issue is not just getting their testimony, and it's the cross-examination for each and every single one of them. if the direct, and again, I'm giving you both some leeway here in terms of summarizing through leading questions. Even if we're going at this pace, there's a good chance we're going to be here till about 1 o'clock in the morning.
I have a lot less questions. But I can't.
I'll invite
This is-
the board
This
to.
is the biggest project we've ever had in this county. Very complex. It's upwards of $500 million. And thank you. But it's just too important to rush this and to run into heavy fatigue and work until we're all worn out and not do it properly for both sides of this issue. And in respect to the county process, it should be done better than to roll on and on till 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm losing my voice and I can't even get loud anymore.
I think you said it well, and we would defer to whatever the board would like to do from that process standpoint. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, my opinion is that we continue on with this, again, with the reminder to the applicant, and then further, if there's going to be a public comment session, and to the attorneys for the opposition. We've heard a tremendous amount of information. I think I'm speaking for the board in general in saying we're not interested in hearing repetition of evidence of information that we've already heard. But I'm personally not interested in continuing this at another time. I would like to continue on with this.
Chair, I just wanted to offer from, if any county staff need to be heard from, there are some that are having to leave because of children and things of that nature, but I just wanted to offer that, and however you make your
We
decision.
might need that staff.
As of now, I still believe you have representatives from the zoning, stormwater, erosion control, and floodplain side here available.
Mr. Chairman, I would also, I mean, we didn't get this report until when?
Monday.
We, as you know, he said an awful lot of stuff in there. We're gonna have to not only cross-examine him, but we're gonna wanna call some rebuttal witnesses up. Not to mention all the other witnesses that we need to cross-examine, plus his 2 traffic engineers. So I'm with George. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm old and I'm getting really tired. And I don't want to, I mean, this is too important to rush through it, and it would give us a little time to look at Mr. McLean's report a little closer and get back. So that's my feeling. I hadn't talked to my clients. They're probably opposed to that, but I'm like you. I think we're going to be here till midnight or later.
We owe it to everyone to do this correctly and to take as much time as it takes.
I agree.
Okay.
I heard Mr. Bissett say that they only got it on Monday. I just want to, we only got it then too. So we shared that final report as soon as we got it. I just didn't want the board to think that we had somehow held something back. It's dated on Monday. That's when it got completed. So,
And I don't get the impression that it was a slight at you in terms of the process.
I hear him say that. I just wanted
I
to make
didn't
sure
mean that.
everybody, yeah.
And we understand that there are issues with getting these reports done because we had some of the same issues, but this matter was continued back in November, and the indication we got then is that we'd have the reports pretty soon after that, but we got the first one on Monday.
Okay. Well, then we have two considerations here, and I've heard Keith, I heard George, both. Realistically, just so everyone in the room can know what we're dealing with, how long do you expect your direct to take if you had to guess? I can't hold you to it, but give me best estimate.
And I'm just looking at the time right now. I'd probably have to say an hour and a half, but that's because we've got Mr. Carson, who's the river keeper, that might be about 30 minutes. The 2 traffic engineers, who I imagine that's going to be longer. And then the appraiser at the end, which might be another 15 to 30 or something like that again. So we could be looking at, anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I'm trying not to underestimate because it's what it is. So, and then cross
And I understand we still have.
and comment. Sorry.
Public.
I was not going to ignore you. You guys have been so quiet, I almost forgot. I understand there are at least 35 people here to speak. I'm guessing some of you will probably want to speak for more than 3 minutes. Is that a fair assumption? Some of you have already spoken for more than 3 minutes? Okay. That puts us somewhere in the ballpark of at least, if I'm being generous, an hour plus worth of public comment, 2 hours of direct.
Probably additional 20 from the city as well.
Thanks a lot, Asheville. I appreciate that. And I've never known any of you guys to be short-winded, so.
Couple hours.
Does anybody want to stay till 3?
Keith.
Yeah, I do.
All right, just informal vote. Can we, yes, sir?
Even though I'm the alternate, I've been here many, many times. And I just will say that you lose your effectiveness.
Microphone, please.
Can't hear. You lose your effectiveness at some point. That's just the nature of it. And this is the largest one. I've been on this board 8 years. I think this is the most significant and transformative that I have been a party to. And I just, in good conscience, don't think we as a board should continue at this point and being fair to all parties. That this gentleman back here was speaking a language I would have to really, really take the time to get a full appreciation from, to even know what a proper rebuttal question would be and to really digest that. And so I just think at this juncture, I don't think it would be fair to take 2 experts. Then I think we need to make a decision if we're going to go forward now or not.
Well, given that time constraint and we know what we're dealing with, I don't relish the idea of continuing it as much as I like you guys. I don't like you enough to do it 3 times if we don't have to. But I don't think it would be fair to the people sitting here, to the people who have already had to leave, and all those who might be watching elsewhere to kind of rush through it just so we can get a couple minutes of shut-eye. To that end, I do want to just kind of take an informal poll, left to right idea of who's okay with the idea of.
I just talk with opinion because I've just been in this role more than I'd like to count.
Similar opinion?
I think it's just gonna run too long. I'd really like to see it done tonight, but it's gonna be after 12 o'clock. It's just too long. I wanna continue it at some point. If they have some people that can't be back or have to testify, maybe we should hear them.
Can't hear.
They can't hear.
If we have some witnesses that can only testify now, we should probably hear them if they have to leave, and then maybe we should continue at that point.
It was only a request due to the, I think the experts can come back. It's just the expense of that is significant.
And this isn't to say that we're going to do it this very second, but just to get an idea so the community can know if they're not going to get a chance to speak, there's no point in having everyone hang out waiting on experts.
No, and then they'll have to cross them and keep going.
Andy?
I think we're here past midnight. I think I'm going to get it done, but it's at least midnight, if not 2. I think we're in a position where we need to consider that.
Thought?
I would like to see it, come to a conclusion, but I think we're all getting tired. And it would just run a lot. I'm sorry. I apologize. Can you hear me now? Thank you. I would like to see it come to a conclusion for everyone tonight, but I don't think that's going to be possible. I think we're just getting overwhelmed and we're getting tired, and we'd like to look at all this material that we've been given, because even after you make your comments, we've got to deliberate and discuss it among ourselves. So I'm for closing pretty soon for tonight.
I don't want to see it go any longer either. I mean, in terms of having to continue it. However, I'm like Lou, I'm getting old, and you start to lose your effectiveness. Plus, we won't have the opportunity to look at all the information and then deliberate and talk amongst ourselves and have questions, because we won't even know what questions to ask. By that point, it'll be so late. So I think we should continue it, unfortunately.
Are there any staff concerns with that? I understand the last thing you guys probably want to do is re-advertise and go through the whole process there, but if we're reaching a point that it would take us at least 30 minutes to deliberate, I don't see that happening any earlier than 3 a.m.
The only thing we need to do, though, is set a clear expectation of when we're going to continue this to. But we're certainly here to entertain that and help you with that decision.
Thank you. With that in mind, either party is also welcome to make a motion to continue. Otherwise, the board may. I understand we have the power to do that on our own, separate and apart, but if that's something you intended on doing after hearing the contents of that report anyway, then that kind of makes it a moot point.
It's certainly getting late, Mr. Chairman. I think everybody wanted to get this done today, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. Even if we went straight through, it wouldn't happen until tomorrow. I've advised boards like you all many years, and I know that I agree with Mr. Lycan and the others who say that you begin to lose your effectiveness after now 7.5 hours. They don't go that long in court. At least most of the time they don't. So.
Not making sense anyway.
We would not oppose a continuance.
Any objection from Mr. Noor or Mr. Edgerton? Or any of your clients for that matter? So we have some public concern. I'm not really sure how to go about addressing that out of order.
The witnesses.
Yeah. I suppose I would advise you, if you are a party who's represented by counsel, share that concern with counsel and have him speak on your behalf, please.
If I could have just a moment to talk with my clients, I would appreciate it.
Nathan. Josh.
This one's definitely, this one's.
We're not supposed to drag this stuff out and take it back to the office or our home, generally speaking.
Let me confirm that, but I think you're right, although you're gonna have to be able to.
Do we want to leave it here, or, I mean, just trash it and get new issues, or?
No, it doesn't things. I mean, if they want people, but.
Let me talk to the issue.
You're not supposed to. Right.
But I don't think it would hurt anything.
On one more like this, where it's split over 3 units, there's information we probably took on the first one. So we shouldn't have picture on the back, but. That's the only thing.
Yeah. Well, let's see when is the first meeting?
Well, they're already very happy with you.
I'm seeing some cases on that one.
Yes. That's my concern too. Other reports out there.
January 8th.
Yeah, we're already, I mean, that's what we're doing. That's what
Should I?
Yeah, that's right. We're going to have to do it.
Can I make a motion that we continue it until January 8th?
Yeah, it's okay.
But, but, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
we're prepared to make a motion that we continue this hearing until January 8th, which is your next meeting.
So the hard part we were just chatting about, because we figured this is going to come up, the next meeting I think is booked to the point that we have 11. So that would be as late as 3 o'clock is. 9 o'clock the next morning might be even better. The next date that I think staff said would work would be the 23rd of January. And that's probably the earliest that we could do, absent going out to February. And that's going to be a special session at that. But in the interest of getting it done, I'm trying to put something out there quicker than February for everybody involved. If you want to take 2 minutes and chat with your clients, let me know if that works.
Should we start at 9 a.m.?
Mr. Chair.
Or 24th, okay.
That's true, okay.
Mr. Chair.
So let me amend that real quick. The 23rd or 24th, that gives us 2 days. One's a Friday, I know.
On behalf of my clients, the 23rd works for all of us and all of our experts.
That works for us as well.
Thursday.
And the reason we couldn't hear it on the regular date in January is we asked, and most of the applicants for this meeting graciously accepted to go to January in lieu of having this meeting.
Any position from the applicant? I think the 23rd works for 2 out of 3. Not to put you on the spot.
Just one say he's checking it.
Please.
And because this is special call, let's go ahead and say, are we going to keep our normal time of 12?
How about 10?
Yes, sir.
The only person, I mentioned it for cross-examination purposes, Mr. Hill testified about the drone footage. He cannot make the 23rd. If we were to do one last thing tonight, maybe it's that, because then that would resolve that. I don't know.
We don't have any questions.
Okay.
Easy enough.
Yes.
It's amazing what a getting late will do for people getting along. Otherwise, 23rd works for everyone?
What time?
Could we?
Well, I want to make sure the day works.
We need a motion.
Mr.
right.
Chair, if
Yes,
we
sir.
could, out of an abundance of caution, I would say if we're going to do this on the 23rd, let's start this in more than enough time to get it all done.
We're thinking 10 o'clock.
10 or earlier works for me. Whatever the board would like. 9, whatever you think would be appropriate.
Can everybody here actually show up at 9, or are we going to be waiting until 10? If we can do 9, let's do 9. That sound good?
Put it on this side at 9 on the 23rd.
All right. So technically, that was a motion made
Second.
by the applicant.
No objection from my clients or the city.
Clear. It needs to be continued to a motion to continue to date certain from the board.
9 on the 23rd?
Yes.
Okay, I move that we adjourn this meeting and move it to 9 on January 23rd.
So all in favor, technically applicant's motion, to the date certain, 23rd of January, 9 a.m. Continued.
Don't adjourn.
We're not going to adjourn yet, but motion to continue. We're hearing that. Just continuing the meeting. You can't leave yet, guys, but continue the meeting to a date certain, January 23rd, 9 a.m. All in favor of, I have a motion there, all in favor of allowing?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No objection from opposing counsel. That will be the new date.
Do we take this home?
Would you like us to hang on to these, or I would love it if you guys could take them back, but I imagine.
I am happy for you all to take them with you and consider them, and but if you would prefer, I can maybe having staff hold them I know the board can consider the evidence they've been presented in this hearing. And I don't want to overstate it, but in between meetings, as long as they don't confer with one another. So I am fine with you all keeping the binders and considering them.
Think
Particularly
we
the
want to
reports
see
you
each
heard.
other after this?
I don't think you'll speak to me later.
So we'll go ahead and figure out something for them. It may be that we can just find a place with staff to keep them so we don't lose them or have someone forget to, because otherwise you'd end up having to provide us with second copies. And
That's I kind of plan on doing that anyways, just because I hate for someone not to have one, but, I prefer for y'all to keep them if you could.
okay, that's fine. I think that resolves this issue for now. Thank everyone here, everyone watching on TV. You have the date certain. If there's any confusion, contact staff or Mr. Noor or the applicant if you have any questions. Okay, if no one's going to leave, great. All right, we'll have a public comment phase. No one's excited to speak anymore.
Thank goodness.
I thought you just continued the whole space and then public comment would be.
I'm on the case. Yeah.
That's why half those folks
The whole rest of the
Recess it.
meeting? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
recess it, yeah.
Then we're good. We're recessed. We're in recess till January 23rd. See you then.
Recess, yeah.